because oftentimes we think that, a lot of like anti BLM folks are quick to point out that a handful of BLM people are socialists or Marxists.
Mm-hmm.
And you can say, hey, I can still fight for rights without agreeing to that same solution. I don't need that solution to be true in order to say we still need to have some solution. So instead of fighting me on what solution, work with me to figure out which solution.
And it's such a and to me, I think what's disappointing is because the goal is always being shifted. Okay, it used to be if you said Black Lives Matter at all, anybody would get quite upset, especially if you were a white American. You think all lives matter, and it's a way to dismiss the argument. Well, all lives matter, Black lives matter, all lives matter, and it's a way to dismiss it. If I had a fun run for cancer and it was brain cancer that I was doing a fun run or raising money for, nobody goes to and says this is wrong, I'm not going to participate, because all cancer matters, not just brain cancer matters, and because Black lives matter, all lives matter, and because of that, Black lives should matter. But so that was the argument before, but now the argument is, all right, Black lives do matter, I get it, and now but the organization is wrong. And yes, there are some of the leaders have admitted that they're trained Marxists, and some of the leadership has admitted to things like wanting to. They took it out of the mission statement. One of the missions was to destroy the nuclear family or whatever, all those things. So there are some things there. But because we move the goalpost and because we don't really want to engage in conversations, we dismiss people by saying, well, they're just Marxists. Well, okay, maybe they are, and maybe I don't agree with their philosophy to the whole extent, but I can agree with Black Lives Matter,
Yeah.
So, okay, now that you finally admitted that's the truth, well, let's talk about that and go forward in it. But it is heartbreaking that we have moved the goalpost to dismiss conversations that we should have. It is unfortunate.
That is actually a type of actual logical fallacy. So on my show, I talk about I want to give names to these fallacies to let people know that these are pre-existing things. These aren't things I'm just pulling out of thin air. These are actual things. And you can look up, Wikipedia has this massive list of hundreds of logical fallacies. And there's a lot that are subsets of each other, but moving the goalpost is an actual type of logical fallacy. That's an actual term. And it's a type of there's two major types of logical fallacies. I won't dive too deep into that, but there's informal and formal fallacies, and it's what's called an informal fallacy. And it is an attempt to, just like in sports, if you got a football kicker and he kicks and he's making it in, and then you literally physically move the goalpost so that he can't get it in.
Yeah.
You're not going to let him score. You're changing the outcome of the game. And that's what happens with this logical fallacy is we will add requirements. Okay, your original idea was this, but now I'm adding more requirements. And it is a way to disengage from the conversation without actually having the conversation. And there's another type of logical fallacy called a red herring.
Yeah.
And a red herring logical fallacy is literally just a distraction.
That's
and there's dozens and dozens of types of red herring fallacies, but it's just a distraction. Do Black Lives Matter? Well, the leaders of the organization are Marxist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, you didn't answer my question.
Yeah,
that's not what we're talking about. Exactly. You didn't answer my question. But logical fallacies work. Not to build an honest discussion, but they work because they do. We do this all the time when I fight. My wife, babe, you said you were going to do the dishes. You didn't do the dishes. Well, you said you were going to do the laundry. You didn't do the laundry. I agreed to do the dishes, and I didn't agree to do the dishes on a contingency on whether or not she did the laundry. Yeah. I agreed to do the dishes, so whether or not she did the laundry has no impact on what my responsibility actually was. Yeah. And that's a type of red herring.
Yeah, like what ifisms, I believe that executive orders are signing a lot of executive orders are wrong. But you thought that when Obama was doing it, but Trump did it, it benefits you. And then you go into, well, you're a Trump guy and she's doing it. Well, Obama did it. Well, that doesn't have anything to do about what's wrong or right. You're just trying not to engage in the conversation. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a type of tribalism. That's another, exactly right. It's a type of bias, and the technical bias is called in-group bias, where you automatically accept people in your group say without challenging it. So, and a great example of this, to kind of show issues on both sides is the child kind of not internment, just the placing the children at the border separate from the families was instituted by
the Obama. That's exactly right.
And it was not a problem under Obama.
Nobody said anything.
It was a problem under Trump. And Biden has actually continued that practice
and upped it up. That's right.
And upped it up.
That's exactly right.
The Huffington Post, HuffPo released an article calling it something like praising Biden for doing it. And so you can look it up, and there's an article praising Biden for it, condemning Trump for the exact same thing. In fact, a lesser version of that.
Exactly right.
And praising Obama. And this is in-group bias. And by being aware and acknowledging that every single human is subject to their own biases.
That's exactly right. Everyone
allows you to step outside and, regardless of people's opinion of her, one of the people that I find most consistent, you don't have to agree with her, but consistent, is AOC. And AOC has condemned Biden for the continued child separation.
It's so funny. I was just about to mention her because she is one that I probably disagree with on a lot of things.
Same.
We have. But if we were ever having a conversation that I wanted to really engage with her on something, this is something that I would start with, because we both feel that she's very consistent on it. And she tweeted the same thing. She says, I don't care which administration it's under, it is wrong, the application of it. So if I was ever to talk to her, I'd go back to that point and say, hey, you know what? I have to commend you on your stance on putting kids in cages on the border, or whatever the case is, whatever you want to say there, and bridge that gap, because I think you will find that most people, especially people that really are trying to be intellectually honest, if you will find something that you can agree with, or that you have the same goals or the same desire on, and if you meet there, you probably can engage in conversation with them.
Yeah, it's disarming.
At least productive conversation, at least.
It's disarming, because a lot of people come into conversations, especially when you disagree, and they come in
ready
with
to fight.
balls up.
That's right.
Yeah,
they're ready to beat
you. And if you're there to fight, and you come up and you set your knife down first, your figurative knife, hopefully you're not getting an actual knife fight, you set your knife down first, that makes them more apt to go, okay, I see, you're not here to destroy me, you're here to talk to me.
Man, that sounds almost like a biblical idea of, living by the sword. Peter, put your sword down, live by the sword, you die by the sword. Yeah, that's
exactly right. Yeah. And we're told that if you respond, a soft word turns away wrath in Proverbs, right. And Paul tells us that if we meet anger with love, that we will heap coals on the head of the one who opposes us.
Right. Right.
And so there's a lot of biblical precedents for being the first to set down your sword and that being okay. And the reason is because it is disarming.
That's right. Hey,
it is disarming.
We're going to take one more break, and we're going to come back and just wrap things up. This has been a fantastic conversation. I told you he was smart. I told you. And this is fun, man. So much to cover. This is Grace Talks.
Lady.
Grace Talks. Whoa, I hope you learned some new words today. But it's so important that we engage, because if we're really going to be productive in our society, we have to break or even understand. Because again, there are some ideas that I do believe that are worth defending and fighting for and standing for, some value structures that you might have. But you can't stand for them and fight for them if you don't know them, if you don't know the merit of them, if you don't know the fact behind it, if you don't know the reasoning behind it and how they were formed and how they even work. How do they work in the society? Like if you're pushing capitalism, for instance, and you can you look back at societies that have used other means and seen what happened to those societies, or can you at least agree that there might be some faults or some things that come short in capitalism, or whatever the case is, whatever subject that you want to be talking about or that we're talking about? Can we agree, or can we really find out what our ideas are? There are so many things, and I think Brett just talked about this in his own life, that I thought I knew the answer for because that's what I was told all of my life, and that's the way you ought to believe. And then I started to study these things, and I'm like, I don't know about that. I think, or at the same time, it strengthened my ideas. It strengthened my value systems, or it strengthened the way that I felt. And now I'm unwavering in my convictions of these things as well. Brett, I want to give you a last word, or you can plug your show. You can tie in any loose ends that we've missed on this podcast, or some ideas. I'd love to have you back because you're smart, and it makes people think that I'm smart just talking to you, or maybe they think that they're smart by listening to you. Are there any things that we missed that we want to tie in, and any way that we can find your show and be a part of what you're doing?
Yeah, so it's Brett's Echo Chamber. Right now I'm just doing to Facebook. I'm going to work on getting it to other platforms. Started it as just a little pet project, and slowly building it out from there, because I think it's important. And I think probably the most important thing that people need to know is that we all have our own biases, and we all use fallacies. We all go about things the wrong way, in one way or another. And people will listen and respect you more when you're able to own up to those things. And you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Be willing to. Yeah. Be willing to admit that you are 100% wrong. Yeah. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to. We were talking about capitalism, and I know a lot of people who have problems with capitalism because the system hasn't worked for them. Mm-hmm. And then I have friends that are just hyper-capitalists, and like, unchecked capitalism is the ideal. And I was like, hey, unchecked capitalism led to child labor. Mm. We have child labor laws because unchecked capitalism goes there. We currently, even recently, as early as 2018, the Nestle Corporation, the U.S. was discussing, hey, are we going to get to a place where we require companies to audit their use of child slavery around the world? And the CEO of Nestle came out and said, hey, just letting you know, if this happens, your price of chocolate's going way up. And it's like...
Didn't this also happen recently with Nike or somebody that basically says something very controversial along these lines? It was pretty recent. I can't remember what it was, but go ahead.
And so I can talk about the merits of capitalism, and I can talk to someone who's an anti-capitalist and talk about the merits of it, and we can talk about the dangers of socialism, especially Marxism, because socialism is a redistribution of wealth. Marxism is that the government controls the means of production, and communism is a system of government, not a system of economics, and that the government controls where you work and how and all that jazz. So people often use those three terms interchangeably, and they're not. But I can talk about the concerns for those. I can talk about democratic socialism in a lot of European countries are democratic socialists. And so it's a redistribution of wealth as deemed by a voting of democratic government. And so it's very fascinating.
Which that would lead more to a welfare state rather than socialism as we know it. You look at the Nordic countries; they're more capitalistic in the way that they run their industries, but it's just how they distribute their gains.
Right.
And that's honestly, exactly right. they wouldn't be as socialistic or such a big welfare state if it wasn't for all the contributions that the United States makes to several of these countries as well.
That's exactly right. And so I can, we can talk about those things, but I can say, I can accept My ideal is ethical capitalism, that people earn their money